Squarinthecircle is a project that was funded by the Arts Plus programme, and it was a way of making a very sort of interesting connection between artists, architects, urban designers, planners, local authorities, small arts organisations and individual artists. And I think a lot of the project has been about learning about other people's areas and perceptions and ways of being a partner in a public art programme. From a personal perspective, I wanted to ensure that we were involving disabled artists at the centre of the ideas. So a lot of my thinking was about making sure that we had a strong, vocal, disabled artist who was very skilled at being at the centre of this development, and to make sure that disabled people are part of this whole picture and to get their perspective across in a fair and equal way. Tony Heaton is an artist that we were really keen to have working on this project because he's creating artworks that challenge, that provoke, that have meaning to all sorts of communities, all sorts of individuals. Very in tune with the sorts of artworks that great artists have created and why they've created them and all the debates and discussions. And he's just a great example to other people that are sort of professionals within architecture, within urban design, because he's so sort of knowledgeable but so warm in the way that he puts across his perspectives and his views. And for that reason, he was just, for us, just key to making this project work.
It was important for the external walls of the sculpture to be quite uninviting, and you can just walk past it and think somebody's just left 5 very large pieces of stone. It's only when you get close to it, you see the marks, then you start to think about whether you can make a connection, and ideally people will connect the fact that all 5 blocks meet by a thought process which puts together a completed circle or a completed square, even though that doesn't really exist. For a wheelchair user, an additional element is that you're still unable to get to the centre where all the interesting marks are made, and it is really attempts to say something symbolically about disabled people's exclusion from decision making, from centres of power. Of course, the interesting thing for me is that it's not important to get to the centre of a piece of sculpture. It's not important enough, but it actually is very important for disabled people to get to the centre of decision making or the centre of power in other structures, and other institutions.
Another thing that's come out of this project is, I think, us as artists, as disabled people, understanding that if we want to be involved in projects of this scale and bigger projects than this, and we want to influence public art, urban design, architecture, it's that we need to understand the language that is used, the language of urban design, the language of architecture. It really means that disabled artists have to have access to the courses that everyone else has access to. And we are now negotiating with different architectural practices and different bodies where architectural practices and disabled artists themselves can begin to understand each other's language and begin to influence each other's work. And I think we're beginning to understand that actually architects and designers have been saying exactly the same as disabled artists. And I think over the last 4 years, we have moved massively into that area of discussion and debate, which is key really to moving forward. And I think it has happened, and this has given us the opportunity and the confidence to do that.
And would the factory manager identify the stone from the sculpture from these big blocks and then say, we'll
yes,
use that, we'll dress that up ready? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, Tony thought a lot about the type of material that he was going to use, and what he finally ended up using was Portland stone for a whole sort of variety of reasons. Things to do with the history of that area, things to do with the coastline of that area, things to do with the fact that the St Paul's Cathedral, many elements of that are made out of Portland stone, and the quarry still recreates sections of St Paul's Cathedral. They were doing that when we visited them, and having that sort of tradition and history of using a material like that, and I think that has made it an even more sort of stronger, more permanent structure that we hope will really enhance the environment where it's been placed. So it was really important actually that decision was made, and even though a lot of our resources went into that particular material, there was a real definite reason for that, and I'm glad that we all stuck with that. It means that piece has that real quality and real strength, I suppose.
I think when I work as a sculptor and I'm looking at architecture, the thing that disables me and most disabled people is lack of access to the built environment, lack of access to goods and services, as well as people's attitudes towards disabled people. So working with architects is really about trying to get to a place where people are thinking about making buildings accessible without thinking in a sort of medicalised way of how do we bolt solutions onto buildings, how do we make facilities specially for disabled people. And really what I'm interested in is working with architects to make buildings not look accessible but just to be accessible. And if that becomes part of the thinking process before any design work gets done, then access suddenly becomes very elegant and very beautiful. So if you can present it as an interesting solution at the start rather than a problem that needs to be addressed, which is going to be a bit of a nuisance and compromise the design, then I think you can win.